Good evening. My name is Akshara Dattani, and on behalf of the Guild, I welcome you all to today's conversation, Connecting Squares, the Handkerchiefs, Textile and Contemporary Art Practice, with curator Uthra Rajgopal in conversation with artists Rakhi Paswani and Suman Gujarat, presented by the Guild. The Guild was established in 1997 with an aim to function as a semi-institutional space within the bustling art hub of Mumbai, India, in 2015. The Guild opened its new premises in Alibag, an upcoming art district near Mumbai, with a large exhibition space expanding its relevance outside urban spaces, and continues to vigorously serve the field of visual arts in India. Joining us today, we have Uthra Rajgopal. Uthra Rajgopal is an independent curator with a specialist interest in South Asian textiles. In 2019, Uthra won the prestigious Art Fund New Collecting Award to build a collection of contemporary textile artworks for Whitworth in Manchester, specifically artworks made by women artists working in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and the UK diaspora. The collection includes works of Rakhi Paswani and Suman Gujarat. Uthra is a keen advocate of championing and expanding the field of textile arts and is currently working on future exhibitions. Uthra also writes for artists, art magazines, journals, and academic publications. Welcome, Uthra. We also have Rakhi Peswani with us. Rakhi Peswani's art practice explores various discursive and material aspects of crafts and the nuanced associations of crafts as languages, especially with an emphasis on the handmade. She is interested in the affective possibilities of materiality and labor, as well as the context or locations these create in contemporary image making. She has recently been examining the environmental and pedagogical ties associated with craft-based practices. Welcome, Rakhi. We have Suman Gujral with us. Suman Gujral is a visual artist specializing in printmaking. Her practice is inspired by her parents' experiences as refugees and migrants, the current refugee crisis, BLM, and the role of colonialism. The issues she addresses are sometimes painful to think about, but she believes that as an artist, she is in a unique position to give voice to what we don't talk about and generate discussion. Welcome, Suman. Thank you again for joining us today, and now we will have a presentation by Uthra.
So my name is Uthra Rajgopal. I'm an independent curator with a specialist interest in South Asian textiles and dress and fashion and everything to do with that wonderful world. I am based in Yorkshire, which is about a 4-hour drive north of London. And it's my great pleasure to have been invited by the Guild Gallery in Mumbai to host this in conversation between two fantastic artists, Rakhi Paswani and Suman Gujarat. And the reason why we wanted to bring these artists together and start a conversation and have a look at their practice relating to textiles and particularly handkerchiefs was because I was in the process of doing a lot of research last year and the year before as part of an award that I had won when I was the assistant curator of textiles and wallpaper at the Whitworth Art Gallery in Manchester. Now that award was called the New Collecting Award, and it was 100% funded by the Art Fund UK. And the idea behind that award was to contemporize the South Asian textile collection in Manchester at the Whitworth, because I felt that whilst my predecessors there had done a lot to purchase new acquisitions and new textile artworks that contemporized other aspects of the textile collection, the South Asian textile collection had become a little bit stagnant. And if we go back to when the Whitworth was founded in 1889, a lot of those pieces in the collection were collected by colonial merchants to help the textile manufacturing industries in Manchester, and as a result they were collecting strips of cloth that were being divorced of the cultural context and the origins, and they were just kind of looking at it for pattern, weight, weave, count, etc., to mimic and imitate the types of patterns and weaves in Manchester, and then sell it back to the colonial markets at a vastly inflated price, and really not only exploiting their powers as colonial rulers, but also there was a lot of exploitation of the workforce, labor and land. So I felt it was important to really bring a contemporary voice to the collection. So I was very lucky to win the award. It's a highly competitive award, and I was given a nice pot of funding to buy new acquisitions from Pakistan, India and Bangladesh, and also from the UK diaspora. And I was specifically looking at South Asian women artists because I felt that South Asian women were not fairly represented in the collection. And let's be honest, a lot of UK collections, a lot of Western collections have fragments of cloth and pieces of cloth where it says maker unknown. And so it's really important to try and start the process of balancing out those gaps. And in the UK and around the rest of the world, there's a lot of talk at the moment about decolonization. And this is really important because it's one step and part of that work. Just to also let you know about the Whitworth, it's, as I said, it's based in Manchester. It's part of the University of Manchester. And the collection holds about 26,000 textile pieces, right from the 2nd century to the present day. You don't have to pay a fee to see the collection. You simply write to the relevant curator and you can book an appointment, and it's open to anyone. You don't have to be an academic, you don't have to be a researcher or an artist. You can just be really curious and nosy and say, I'd really like to see this piece. And so hopefully you will get an opportunity to do that if you're in England or if you're in Manchester at some stage. There's also a large collection of fine art as well. So it's not just textiles, but obviously textiles plays a big, important feature in the history of Manchester and in the history of textile manufacturing. So as part of the award, I was also paired up with a brilliant mentor called Dr. Shona Datta. If you've watched any of the BBC documentaries, The Treasures of India, Dr. Shona Datta presented that and did a fantastic series for the BBC. So with her assistance, I was able to travel across South Asia to those 3 countries, and I was able to meet with artists, visit art schools, and really get to know artist practice and kind of gauge what's happening out there in terms of contemporary textile art. And 2 of the artists who were selected for this highly prestigious award are with us today, Rakhi Paswani and Suman Gujarat. And I'm super excited to be hosting this in conversation, because I think it's really important that we start to bridge those gaps between South Asia and the diaspora. And having been born in Madras as it then was and brought up here, and having visited India and coming back to the UK several times, there are so many stereotypes, I feel, on both sides. And you know, sometimes I feel too Indian, or sometimes I feel too British or too English, depending on where I am. So this is the start, I hope, of several more conversations between artists in South Asia and artists here as part of the diaspora relating to textiles and contemporary textile art practice. So without further ado, I will hand over to Rakhi. Rakhi, darling, you're on mute.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Really apologies for a small glitch of 10 minutes, but I'll really try to cover the time. I'm really thankful to the Guild Gallery and everybody at the Guild, Chitra, Akshara, Shalini, of course. They've been most generous of their support and time, and they have really brought a lot of things. They're bringing a lot of online content for us to look at from India. I'll just jump into the presentation with a very brief phrase. Actually, it's a Sindhi phrase called, as it's spoken, it's "Rumal mein dhakke chavan," which means to hide some difficult conversation in a handkerchief and speak. It's not a literal translation, but the phrase was resonating in my mind when we were planning this webinar. But of course, I've heard this phrase many times from my grandparents, often saying this phrase when they have to work with young girls, growing up girls who want to explore the world. This is, in some ways, it also has connotations of being diplomatic and tactful but also being feminine in a way. While this conversation is ongoing about issues of diaspora cultures, Southeast Asia in the larger world, it is also a key point to think about what are these conversations we are talking about, and are these conversations difficult or not? I'll just briefly share the screen. Give me a moment. Yes, I hope everybody can see.
Yes, we can see that, Rakhi.
Yes.
If you click on the screen, just to the right of the 4 squares, yeah, that'll enlarge the screen. Brilliant.
So I can only see my presentation, all right?
That's fine, that's fine.
Yeah. So I've put together a series of works, out of which one work went to the collection at Whitworth. This series was essentially done on handkerchiefs, and the handkerchiefs were procured from all over the country. Mostly South India, but also the fact that some of the handkerchiefs were with me from my grandparents' time, but then some handkerchiefs I purchased newly. So they have a relation of long time as well as very recent times, but then also in terms of fabrics, they are, of course, produced en masse in commercial setups, industrial setups. But what I've done with this series is essentially use some ancient techniques of hand embroidery from the subcontinent. I grew up learning a lot of these techniques from a rich heritage that my family carried with them. I'm from second generation of partition affected family, and from both my maternal and paternal side, the memorabilia that we had in the family was a lot of different kinds of textiles.
Rakhi, we've just lost your sound. Hopefully she'll be back soon. Whilst we're trying to get her sound back, I will say that
Okay.
Oh, you're back. Brilliant.
Okay, my connection is unstable. So these techniques were essentially coming to me from certain upbringing in very informal textile practices. Of course, the relation of taste and textiles was very much part of the upbringing because both sides of the family carried huge amount of things, materials that were textiles of different kinds, usable and unusable, new things as well as old things. And that memorabilia in a way became inheritance of certain cultural traditions. But then of course, like it's about a time which I never was in. I don't know what Pakistan was like when you hear stories about your grandparents and your parents, but so in a way, textiles became a language of inheritance for me. And as a second generation of partition affected refugee family, the loss of mother tongue due to the loss of motherland in a way led to artistic practices. It's textiles became a sort of mother tongue in that sense. And that's where I think I started. And this is after art college when I, in a way, re-invoked the practices that I had learned as a child. This is on a Southern Indian, Tamilian actually handkerchief, and it's a hand bloom fabric that has been tattered and then it has been darned. Rafugari is a very old tradition, and I learned this from my mother and grandmother, Rafugari tradition. But of course, the idea of tradition was not there. It was a technique. Techniques as affects, as what they can and what they can enable in the contemporary times and what they can be used for as a form of communication or expression in a way. This is another work. This is the work that has been taken by Whitworth. It's so this is the tradition of Telia Rumal from Telangana region. I was collecting some of these fabrics which were basically going extinct. The fabric is oiled in a specific way after the ikat is woven. And it was traditionally used for waterproofing, and it would be used by milkmen to make a turban on their heads to keeping a milk pot, for example. And I was really amazed by the density of the fabric and the liquidity that it carried with it in a way. So I was old techniques, see if there could be possibilities of using them in a way that they can generate certain expressive form and a kind of a narrative. This is another work from the same series. It's done with mirror hand embroidery, mirror work, as it's called in Gujarat and Rajasthan. Again, using an ancient technique, but really exploring its possibilities. And this is another one of the same technique, but here I've landed up getting large mirrors cut and then using that for certain other kind of affect. This is again like my upbringing in a very middle class household. I learned like all the traditional anglicized names of stitches, hand embroidery stitches. This is of course stem stitch and satin stitch. And all these
Rakhi, oh, you're back. You're back.
Okay, sorry. There's power outage here, so the connection is very stable. It's on hotspot. Yeah. So all these words underneath, the English words, these words lend themselves to the idea of the body, but at the same time, the idea of fabric. And I was in some ways exploring possibilities of creating certain language around a laboring body, the wear and tear of the body, but as well as wear and tear and a kind of like response that fabric generates from that wear and tear of the body. And of course, the language as English, but then language of hand embroidery also. I was like bringing all these elements together, explore the work in a series, and I often work in series because I feel like one image doesn't really substantiate to the ideas that I work with. And did I go too fast? So this work was actually exhibited with a large install. This was how the install looked. It's called Inside a Melancholic Object. So while the viewer entered the space and dealt with the entire very tightly cloistered objects hanging from the ceiling, one had a view of the works in question. They could be like led to another kind of viewing apart from the visceral viewing. They could be led into another kind of viewing, like a manuscript viewing or a miniature viewing on the walls. This is how it was installed. I'll just stop sharing the screen, yeah. I really condensed my presentation, but I hope I could put the points across, and I'll hand over to Uthra now. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rakhi. We'll go back to the work that was acquired by the Whitworth, which is called Damp, in conversation after we've heard from Suman. So Suman will just do a short presentation about her work. Look, she's so excited, she can't wait. And then we'll start the in conversation, and that will take about 15, 20 minutes, the in conversation, and we'll then open the floor for questions. So if you have a question, please do type it in the chat box, and if you go to the section everyone as opposed to panelists, everyone should be able to see your question. Apologies that I didn't say that at the beginning, but as you can tell, it's slightly unrehearsed now, so we're freewheeling. Suman, it's over to you.
Thank you. Okay, is my slideshow being shown? I can't actually see. Do I need to share my screen?
Yeah, Suman, so if you have your slideshow and
Suman, my colleague is sharing the screen for you. So you can just indicate her when you want the next slide to be shown. Huh? Thank you.
Okay, could you start with the second slide, please? Is that okay? My interest in partition really began when I was doing my MA. I started my MA back in 2016 and thought that when I did it, what I would be looking at was the history of art in India. But gradually, as I began to do the MA, I began to realize about the massive effect of partition. And like a lot of people, my mother had spoken to me when I was young and had started telling me stories about partition, but I didn't really pay attention, because I think when you're young, you don't actually always realize how important the events are that your parents have passed through. And I had no idea about what a momentous event this had been and how it had sent its fractures across the whole of the subcontinent. I decided, can I go back to to the second slide, please? So I decided that I would work with etching. And this is the first etching plate that I made in the series. Can we go back to that slide, please? Can we go back to number 2, please? Hello? No, can we go back to number 2, please? Number 2, please, of the plate, of the metal plate. Thank you. No, number 2, please. So this is the first plate the first etching plate that I made. And the reason
Suman, we've lost your audio. Devon
Hi,
is not.
can you hear me?
Oh, you're back.
Can you hear me
back.
now? Okay, can we go back to the second plate, please? Would it be easier if I shared this myself?
Probably, if you've got it to hand, it would. I think it would be much easier, because I'm not sure the order that you're referring to is exactly the order that Chitra and Akshara have it in.
Okay, if you can enable, if you stop sharing and allow me to share, then I'll share it from my own page, if that's okay. Chitra, is it possible for me to share my screen?
Yes, you can share. Have enabled you?
Yes, Chitra, you need to stop your share.
Yes, and then I can share mine. Right, great. I decided to use etching because for me, the way that the acid works on the plates to make the marks is the way that life and events outside our control make marks on us, and they leave permanent scars and permanent changes. So we have a new landscape that we're living in. And I felt very strongly that this is what happened with the partition of India. When you make an etching plate, you have marks which you intend, but if you leave the plate in the acid for an overly long period of time, you also end up with marks which are unintended. And I think this is also what happened with partition. The consequences of making that division weren't fully understood. The people at the time, people didn't really know what was going to happen. And I think a lot of the violence was unexpected. The fact that it would be so momentous and so many millions of people would be affected and so many would die, I don't think was calculated. And here on this plate, you can see that there are some strong lines. The line that goes across is actually the line which is between West Pakistan and what stayed as India. And the reason why when I speak about this, I talk about what stayed as India, is when I first really started to ask my mother again on my MA about her experiences. The very first question I asked her, in retrospect, I realized it wasn't a stupid question, but it showed that I hadn't completely understood what partition had meant to her. Because the very first question I asked her was, "So Mum, how did you feel about leaving Pakistan?" And she looked at me and she said, "Sammi, I didn't leave Pakistan, I left India." And in that moment, I really understood how she had felt about being taken away from her home. So I'm having problems as well. So then my project was to make many etching plates, and you can see there's a whole series here. And this series is called Autobiographical. All of these plates are based on different aspects of my life, but also connected to what happened at partition. For example, the second plate along at the top is called Story, and that shows a central event which has then sent its fractures out across the whole landscape, which I feel is what happened in Pakistan, in India. Then on the bottom right-hand corner, there's a circular piece which is called Cycle, and that has the outer part of the cycle piece is, the outer line is a barbed wire, but it shows a kind of vortex as well going on there. And that reflects my feeling that we're still caught up in a cycle of war and displacement and events that people can't control that change their lives. So by the end of the MA, I was not only interested in what happened at partition, but also in the current refugee and migration crisis that we're caught up in, which I feel that we don't know when it will end. When the plate that I showed you at first, which is called Fractured Earth, is printed, the borderline becomes reversed. And so for me, it then becomes symbolic of all the fractures and displacements that we undergo on our planet. This work has become very central to me because I so strongly believe that not only the people who were there at the time were affected by partition, not only the refugees and migrants who are currently displaced from their homes are affected, but those fractures carry on. And there's a quote from Jonathan Greenberg, which I'd like to share with you, from an essay that he wrote, which is where he says, "Wounds inflicted long ago retain their scars. Borderlines dividing territories become permanent scars on sacred geographies, scars on the land, scars on the psyche of survivors, witnesses and refugees, of their children and their children's children." So I see in my mum that she still has many anxieties which started in that time, which she has actually, some of which she's passed on to us. And one is a fear that everything will completely change without her being able to have any power over that. After, as Rakhi has said, that fabric in the family, things that my parents had kept for over years, have become very important. And this is the first piece of work that I did with one of my father's handkerchiefs. My mum has given me, my mum keeps everything. And I think that is partly to do with having been a refugee and having had to leave everything behind. She doesn't throw anything away in case, just in case it can be useful, or just in case she won't be able to get it again. And after my dad died in 24 years ago, but during my MA, my mum gave me a whole load of his hankies. And this is a monotype of one of his hankies. He always carried a hanky. I associate that with him, I think, as many people do with their father. It's a crisp white hanky. And this piece is called Absent. And for me, it speaks of my sense of loss, that my dad is no longer with us. But there's also a sense of calmness about it in the way that it floats in the blue sky. After that, I started to work directly printing onto the handkerchiefs. And on this piece, this is the piece that was selected by Uthra for the Whitworth collection, for the Art Fund collection. This piece is called All My Sorrows, and it's printed directly onto my dad's handkerchief. And it's, the blue-black basically is speaking of the long shadow cast by partition. I handmade the barbed wire that you can see on this piece, which obviously represents the border between West Pakistan and India, which is the one that displaced my parents. I've put some sparkling ink on, and that represents the fact that many people, when they fled across the border in both directions, fled at night. And also the border can be seen from outer space. There are NASA photographs of it because it's lit at night. You can see it snaking across the land. Here is a detail of it where you can see the barbed wires imprinted right into the handkerchief, the way that it imprinted right into the fabric of the subcontinent. After this handkerchief, after the handkerchief work, I then started to work more with stitch. This piece is called Counted, and it's basically about the people who aren't counted in these mammoth events where many people die. And I made holes with a book tool into a piece of khadi paper using book threads to make these knots. Each golden knot represents 100 people and each red knot represents 1,000. There's a gap at the top because we know that these losses aren't going to end. And in a way, it's become applicable now to COVID as well, because we don't know how many people are affected. This is just quick details of the back of the work and the front. The last piece of work I'm going to talk about is River. And this is because everyone who was at partition talks about the rivers of blood. And I've been told directly about that by people who were there and also by their descendants. These knots are made to remember those who died. They also look like barbed wire and they look like sutures. And here I am with a big piece of work I've made, which is called River, and it snakes across a piece of khadi paper, which is 200 centimeters by 80. And underneath, you can see there are some words underneath it. And I've written all the relative words in Punjabi, Hindi, Urdu, and English. So the knots memorialize them. Obviously, I can never name all the people who were killed, but this feels like a way of honoring them. And I had the poem that went with that piece of work, but it's not on the end of the slide. So because one of the things that's happened to me in the last year is that I've started to record my mother's stories through writing poetry, and I have also been, the reason that poetry has become very important to me is I think it's a very immediate way of reaching people and very accessible.
Hello, Suman. Sorry to interrupt you. Do you want to stop your share and screen share and read one of your poems?
Yes, if I can do that. Hang on, because my mouse is disappearing. Hang on. Stop. I can't see my cursor. Let me see. My cursor has disappeared. So
if you try minimizing your screen, it should be visible. Try that.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, it's gone. Yes, thank you. Can you see me now?
Yes, we can see you. Would you like to?
Yeah, I'll bring the poem up.
Thanks.
And I'll read it.
So while
my children
bringing up her poem, the reason why we wanted to showcase this aspect of Suman's work during this webinar was because script and word and poetry and the power of words comes through really beautifully in both their works, but Suman is also a poet and writes poetry and is frequently sort of, it's a reciprocal exchange, I think, between the poems and the artwork. So Suman, if you'd like to read your poem.
So can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Okay, I'll read. This poem is called River, and it goes with the stitched work I showed last. We ran, jubbals burning in the embers of our former lives. We ran, stones ripping our feet, sharp reminders to keep on running, keep ahead of sharper blows. We ran, smudged with ash, newly minted ghosts whispering beside us. We ran, carrying our children, treasured burdens, weighing us down, pushing us forward. We ran without dreaming in the dark. We ran, red-eyed, raw-edged, tears mingling in the water. We ran over those face down in the river.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Suman. Okay, so I'm just going to do a screen share with the two works that were acquired by the Whitworth, and then we're going to start our in conversation. So let me just get this up on the screen. Can everyone see this? Yeah, you can all see it. So on the left, we have the work by Rakhi titled Damp and on the right, All My Sorrows by Suman. And I just wanted to start off our conversation by talking about the handkerchief and why the handkerchief was chosen to act as your canvas, essentially, to be the base work for the work, and how integral it is. Obviously, handkerchiefs have a great history in terms of its circulation. Obviously, having been born in Madras, you know, the Madras real handkerchiefs have a long history. It's got a very powerful association with men's dress as well, and how the handkerchief is tends to be tucked away and kept in pockets in very intimate body parts, whether it's in breast pockets of a shirt or pockets on the hips of trousers, or even on back pockets or inside pockets of jackets. And I found that you know, that element of the sort of the circulation of the handkerchief and the loaded history that comes with it was a really good place for us to start in conversation. So Rakhi and Suman, would you like to explain more about why the handkerchief was so important for you to use in your artwork? You're both on mute.
Shall I go first, or Suman,
Yeah.
would you like to go first?
You'd like to both unmute yourself, and we can make quite a fluid conversation.
Am I unmuted now?
You're
Suman,
unmuted now, yes. Unfortunately, one of you will have to speak, and then the other one.
Yeah. So
I'll go first. You want Rakhi?
would you like to go first? You could go first.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The reason why the handkerchief was important to me is obviously it's a very personal reason, because I hadn't really thought about incorporating it into my work. But when I was helping my mum clear her house out, and she gave me all of these hankies, she had 15 or 16 of them. It immediately reconnected me back to my father, and all the times I saw him wiping his face, wiping tears, and wiping his brow. And it felt very important to me to use the hankies also, because when my dad was alive, he never ever spoke to me about his experiences of partition. I feel really sad that I don't know what his story was, but also I kind of wonder what he saw and maybe what he did, because he was kind of 18 or 19. And I wonder whether he had bad memories that he was never willing to share. Whereas my mum, who was only 12, she says she barely really remembers what happened. And she also talks about the refugee camps outside where they lived, which also makes me think about cloth. So that's actually why I started to incorporate handkerchief, and also it's a universal symbol of grief and sadness in a way. Thank you.
Rakhi?
So I think one of the reasons that so these works are done on the very anglicized handkerchief and not on a rumal in that sense, and both the words are not interchangeable in a way. They're also layered. So I was in some ways looking at exactly like what you said, Uthra. It's a canvas for me. It's a canvas because it has certain lineage and certain history, which is different from the history of rumal. And rumal in that sense is it could be really small, but it could be really big as well. It is a very functional object, but at the same time, the hanky that I've used here is essentially coming to me from white collar workers' life in that sense, modernized life in that sense. And I've led most of these works with fragmented images of the body. So they become like, they become textual in a way. The surface itself generates a textuality where the organic element of the body is, really curtailed and geometricized, and it's laid out there in a very vulnerable way. So that was my intention. But of course, when I was conceiving this work, I was thinking of the install as well. So while the fragment has gone to a museum, some fragments are with me, some are with certain gallery. The first time the work is exhibited, and that's very important in contemporary art, the first time it's exhibited, it has certain resonance. So I was imagining with these works, I was imagining the larger space as well. So it was a part of a curated show. And yes, the works are standalone, but essentially I still think like they work as series in a way, series of handkerchiefs in a collective way, but really like pasted on the wall and having these fragmented images of the body in a way. Yeah.
Thank you. And just to avoid any confusion, this central section here, when you talk about rumal and waterproofing and oiling the cloth, this is the section that we're referring to. Is that?
Yes, yes. Yeah. But when you see you would have seen the work. When you see the work, it's in frame. The entire handkerchief is in frame. The center fragment of the fabric is a handloom woven fabric. It's a different weave. It's different from the machine produced handkerchief. Yeah.
And so what's fascinating is the way the body has actually been impregnated into the artwork, because if you see here this inserted hand woven piece, and then you've used stitch as almost like painting actually, to outline the underarm, the hairy underarm pit. And then in Suman's work, if we look at these beautiful sort of splatters, the body is impregnated in a way that's actually absent. You can't see it. And again, if you look at this piece, it's just this kind of fractured section of the body that's been outlined. Would you like to talk a bit more about the body and also about gender, which I think is a really interesting point to think about in both of these works? We've heard how it's associated with white collar workers and the father and men, but then we also have this slight ambiguity in that we don't really know what gender can be attached to the fragment of the body, and here the absence of the body. So Suman and Rakhi, would you like to talk a little bit about the body and how that is
so the fragments that I was drawing on the work, the fragments were essentially agendered out, and they had like a resonance of a fatigued body. Whether it's male or female, it's left ambiguous because it's essentially on a canvas. The background of that is this modern space, and I wanted to look at a body that has been neutralized in a way, and it becomes like a physical, heavy, melancholic body in a way. So while the work in the space carries a very physical, visceral response to the viewer in regard to the laboring body, these works are more like they're a narrative in a way, and hand embroidery for me is a chronicling tool in that sense. And that chronicling tool is, it allows these fractures, and it allows these kind of like fragments to be chronicled in a way. So while, yes, we know about embroidery and how it has been associated with women's work, but it's also, when you look at the traditions of hand embroidery, that you have all these male workers, you have the Mughal craftsmen of all kinds, you have, so there is a rich history of textiles based out of men's work as well as women's work. But at the same time, I was looking at the fatigued body, and that became a prominent pivotal point for me to explore in these works.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting is how the body is anonymous, and thinking about labor and the labor involved with weaving and textile practices. And I'm also thinking about issues around colonialism,
Yes.
and how the labored body was seen as a commodity.
Yeah.
Which I think comes across very powerfully. Suman, did you want to talk a little bit more about reference to the body in your work?
Yep, sure. What I was thinking was that this work with the handkerchiefs that I've started is actually so very personal to my own story and my father, and the sadness that I feel. And as you mentioned, you know, this handkerchief speaks of the absence of his body. With regard to women, what I feel is that the funny thing is that my dad never ever bought his own hankies. It was always myself, my mum, and my sisters who would buy him them as presents, and it was kind of like a celebration, but also an acknowledgement that we knew that this was his thing, that he always had to have a snowy white hanky, and it symbolised him taking care of his body in a way, I suppose. With the marks on this handkerchief, I also think Zarina Hashmi, who is one of my most respected icons, when she spoke about partition, she said that the border is not on the heart. Sorry, the border is on the heart, not on the land. And when I look at this, this barbed wire on this handkerchief, it does look like a scar. So the scars are made in our psyches and on our bodies as well, because the people who came out of partition, many of them did have physical as well as mental scars.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And
thank you.
I actually have one of my late father's handkerchiefs sitting next to me, which I will show everybody when I stop sharing the screen, because what I'm also interested in hearing both of you talk about is the line and the lines that we see in these artworks for two reasons. Firstly, the lines that create the borders within the handkerchief, in the patterning of the handkerchief, and also how line has been used in the process of dye, and also the process of stitch. And if we look at Suman's work here, we have this line kind of breaching the borders of the handkerchief, the pattern in the handkerchief, which I find incredibly powerful. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts about how you've you know, used line and lines in your work, and if you could just talk a little bit more about that, please, and then we'll open the floor to the questions.
Suman, would you go first?
Well, as a printmaker, line is very important to me. And when I first started making prints, my works were always very graphic and very intentional. With this work, I've actually I didn't completely plan where the lines were going to go. I feel that mirrors what happens in our lives and what happens in world events, that lines are drawn, but we don't necessarily know what they're going to mean. Is that okay, Uthra?
Yeah, no, I think that's really powerful. Thank you.
The thing I didn't mention, hello?
Sorry, have I done something? Have I stopped screen sharing?
You have. But the last thing I was going to say was on the handkerchief that I did, that I've printed there, All My Sorrows, there are some unintentional lines there with the creases, which I hadn't really been thinking about when I put it through the press. And I've told Uthra this, that I had wondered about ironing the handkerchief so it was very neat and tidy, but I just left it because I feel, again, that's how life is. It's not tidy.
Yeah. Yeah. Apologies if anybody saw me reading the questions. I'm just conscious of time. So I do apologize if that was a distraction. Rakhi, would you just like to pick up on
Yeah, so in these works, I was really interested in not making line in that sense. So the graphic quality of drawing in a very like academic setup, it's this improvised, very quick, skillful image that comes out of the author in a very like single stroke in a way. But at the same time, I've explored this actually in other works as well. I've explored what it is to create lines out of embroidery without drawing, and sometimes with drawing, sometimes leaving the first line there and seeing if the form creates more resonance with the pencil as well as the fabric, the thread imparting something on its own. So yeah, this here, the line has been drawn by embroidering. It's just this trying to achieve the form kind of a situation. And I've used other images, the hand images, for example. There are resonances of the first drawn lines, and some of it is improvised. So line in that sense, it's also letting go of certain technical control in the work, but at the same time, what that letting go of technical control means for the image, what it can generate, what kind of affect can it generate in terms of a vulnerability comes through when you show that you're not skilled, and you be okay with that in a way. So it has a very, in a way, it's almost like a hate-love relationship with the idea of making an image through line, but it's also very important for me to arrive at the lines. And when I'm doing some hand embroidery, I really go into like whether this line would be a single thread or a thinner thread than a single thread. Would it need double or triple thread? So I control the quality of the line according to that. I sometimes leave very thin, faint marks of graphite also on the on the image. So it's about certain kind of like you creating certain quality in the image in a way. You're crafting through that quality. Yeah, I hope this pulls through. Yeah.
I think it's, the more I look at it, the more connections I see, and I'm also thinking about mark making and how
it's also then the body image that comes through. It's not a photographic image, you know. It's an image that comes through with certain experiential quality of the body. It could be like tactile experience, it could be certain visual experience. So it's not in that sense photographic.
Yeah. And I was, and absolutely. And, you know, the other thing, apart from mark making and lines, as I'm looking at both these pieces side by side, the other thing that I'm thinking about is fluids, the sensation, touch.
Yeah.
You know, we've got damp, we've got sweat, we've got we've got blood that's under the sky of midnight. And so the title that came up in my head, just as the phrase that came up in my head just as I've been hearing both of you talk so eloquently, is blood, sweat and tears, because it seems to bring about all those emotions and uses and references together. So that's just I'm just sharing that with you. Right, I'm going to stop sharing and we are going to look at some questions. Now, if the audience is feeling comfortable, you are welcome to turn on your cameras and speak to us live with your question. Whilst you're having a think about that, I'm going to go to the Q&A box because I can see a little number 8. So let's see what we can how far we can get through. Right. First question, Renuka Sawhney, could you tell us about your upcoming projects? I guess that's both of you.
Suman? Oh, shall I just go? So I'm working towards a solo right now, so I'm not taking up anything further. And I don't know how it will get shaped right now. I'm in the midst of different works. They're in different stages. I often work like that. I start many things and I'm not clear how I'll go about it, and slowly things fall in place. So I don't know right now what elements it will take. So yeah, right now it's really like looking forward to the coming year, hopefully, yeah.
That sounds really exciting, Rakhi, and we look forward to hearing more. How can we find out more about your work and forthcoming exhibitions?
I show with galleries, but also I've shown outside of gallery circuits as well. I'm very bad at updating my website, but I try to put things on social media as much as possible. I really like keep away from social media also, but yeah, I mean, I put it up on social media, and that would be a good point to, yeah,
have a look at. Thank you. And Suman, the unstoppable Suman.
That's a great description. So I have just managed to get some funding from Arts Council England for a big project about combining poetry and visual work. So for the next kind of 6 months, I'll be experimenting with how to show poetry and visual work together. I'm also moving studio in the middle of all this, and I've got a solo show coming up in September. And that solo show is actually going to be about the migration crisis, but also about how we've been affected by COVID, and that's called Wave. So somewhere between moving studio, doing my Arts Council project, I'm also making some new work for the show in September. And
Brilliant.
then I'm going to have a lie down.
Yeah. A cup of tea as well. So just going back to the Q&A, Sumi, thank you. Sumi Pereira says, was most concerned that you had a glitch with your poetry, but thank you, Sumi, and all noted, and apologies accepted for joining us late. Prague, for those of you who don't know Prague, he's an amazing artist and he's based in Mumbai. Prague, are you there? And would you like to read out your question, or would you like me to read it out? Okay. I shall just read it out. So he says, King Richard II of England, his dates are 1377 to 1399, is widely believed to have invented the handkerchief, a square piece of cloth to wipe his nose. And he says an English narrative. Partition was primarily British colonial, an intangible idea to divide and rule India, which resulted into the intangible idea of partition. How do you see the handkerchief as a colonial idea in your work?
So I did mention the fact that it's a canvas, the background surface that I'm using, making an image on. But of course, we have a lot of things that are colonial. We have inherited colonialism in various forms. Even our day-to-day nature sometimes has this inherent kind of intangible but very powerful force of looking at the world in specific frameworks. So the handkerchief has this history, but then also what do we do with this history is very important. And in this set of works, I think like I was using it as a backdrop in a way, and it served its purpose to me. It was placed on the walls just the way an art gallery would have paintings on the wall. And but of course, the layering of it, once you stand there in front of the work and you see the work, you see the layered narrative around it, disjointed but layered. Yeah.
Thank you. And Suman, I think we've already talked about the colonial, post-colonial connections and memories in your work. Is there anything else you want to add? I'm just conscious of time and we've got quite a lot of questions to get through.
No, just very quickly, first question made me think about all the colonial gentlemen, you know, who always had their very lovely handkerchiefs swanning about, and the rest of us with our hankies, which were used, you know, for working purposes.
Yeah, quite right. So yeah, I think that would be a lovely lovely aspect to delve more into in the curation of these works side by side. Right, Nirali Lal, to both oh no, wait, to both Rakhi and Suman, using a handkerchief / rumal as a canvas is interesting, as it is not a clean slate to start upon, express and create. So in a way, it can be like using a ready-made object with its associations and creating your experiences or expressions in relation to it. Wouldn't that be right? Would you like to comment on that idea of using the handkerchief as a ready-made object?
I guess in a way it's like a canvas or a piece of paper that they're ready-made objects as well, except handkerchiefs feel more personal.
Yeah, Rakhi?
Yes, the textuality lends itself, the object, what it means, what it holds itself in the cultural framework in that sense, for sure. Yeah, it's not a clean slate to begin from. Yeah, it's a choice. Yeah,
exactly. But also just thinking about that idea of the ready-made. I think, Suman, when you talk about it, it's from a personal archive, which takes it out of the ready-made in a way. And again, with Rakhi's work, there's a personal transaction that's taken place that has, you know, transferred it from this anonymous, mass commercialized piece of cloth available on the market for sale to the point where it's been purchased and it's then become it's transformed into quite a personal piece of cloth that's been manipulated through the practice. So I think that's a really interesting point, and we can talk about that another time. So thank you for that question. The next one is from Isha. Hello, my question is for Rakhi. She actually addresses you as Rakhi Ma'am or Rakhi Ma'am, which over in England, only the Queen is addressed as Ma'am. But I'm going to stick to what Isha is saying. So I do see your works has the potential of talking beyond the image. I wanted to ask that though your works deal without social cultural archive, I'm not sure what that means, she's also referring to this idea of the strong medical gaze and the body as a site of vulnerability and despair. How do you see and draw these trajectories of also building a medical archive through your pictorial journey? So I guess it's this idea of the social, cultural aspect and the medical gaze, which I find absolutely fascinating. Would you like to reply to that?
I think like this requires a longer answer, but I have been, like I said, the academic training of drawing, and of course it's very deep association and very old association with the medical gaze of the body. I have been interested in this trajectory, but I am not constantly like quoting from that trajectory. But at the same time, it's also a process for me to absorb. I don't know if I'll lead to an archive or not. I don't know. It's too big a project to think about. But I have interest in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century drawing traditions that led to other kinds of technological and image associations. I have like gone through a series of personal journeys with doctors and family of like very, very sick people, and the whole establishment of medical fraternity, what and how it looks at the body, the kind of imaging possibilities that it has today, that we are almost like, we are like ignorant fools in that whole lineage at this point. But it really fascinates me, and I don't know what I will do with it, but I've collected a lot of material, but I don't know how I'll interweave it with my own possibilities and capacities in a way. But yeah, it's of deep interest to me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And what comes to mind about the medical gaze is things like sutures and stitches.
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah.
you know, the handkerchief using
Yeah.
that emergency go-to cloth that could be used.
It's a very rich history actually, and it's very well documented already.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I feel like this kind of a wanderer in that world. And textiles also has been of such enormous interest to me, just the practices associated with that. So I don't know, as an artist, it's very like exciting for me to see all this, but I don't know how I'll bring them together and interweave. I don't know right now. Yeah.
And also, just as an aside, at the University of Leeds, you can do a master's in medical textiles, which I think is brilliant. I love that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to learn. And Sumi, Suman, I'm just, I know too many Sumans and Sumis now. Anyway, my head is getting confused. Suman, just when I'm looking at yours, I'm also thinking about indigo and the use of dye in, you know, seeing body parts inside us that are not congested or congested. And I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts or reflections on the idea of the medical gaze, which I find deeply fascinating.
I'm sorry to disappoint you. I have never thought about that, but I have thought about indigo and the fact that battles were fought over it, and it was exploited and used for colonial enrichment.
Brilliant.
But yeah.
So right, I'm going to read out one more question, and then we're going to go to Kautuk, who has been patiently waiting to ask his question. So Sumi Pereira, hello Sumi, welcome, lovely to have you here. Sumi is another brilliant artist, and she's based in the UK and has a long family history to Sri Lanka. So till now, she says, till now, I had never considered the gendered aspect of size within hankies. Men's hankies being larger than women's, etc. Yes, there is obviously a difference in size between men and women's bodies, but really, is there a difference between the secretions that require a larger hanky? Is it more a symbol of dominance, question mark, not sure, dot, dot, dot? Well, the phrase that comes to my mind is hanky-panky. So Rakhi and Suman, how would you respond? Would you like to respond to Sumi's very astute observation?
Do you know, I hadn't thought about that either, but yes, women's handkerchiefs were smaller, and maybe it is a dominance thing, because I suppose the male hanky can overshadow the woman's hanky, if you want to look at it in that way. And it's very interesting. I don't associate hankies with any of the women in my family, except that we used to buy them. We weren't, I don't remember us.
In our family, all the aunties had a little embroidered handkerchief tucked into the waistband of their sari. And I remember my grandmother, the Tamil word for grandmother is pati. Pati would always have a handkerchief. And sometimes, although I also noticed that the men in the family would shorten it to a kerchief. You have a kerchief? It's like, I have a handkerchief. And nobody would actually use the word hanky in our family, but that's just an aside. Rakhi, hanky-panky.
I think it's too easy a framework to provide, like the bigger is more dominant in that sense. I think like that framework has to be dismantled because whether the history of the object has this large and small according to the gender. I think it's also about taste and certain kind of like associations with something to hold. The hands are bigger as well. I don't know about secretions, but really but at the same time, is it a symbol of dominance? I don't know, because when you see some of the beautiful, very well done hankies of women, and they look more dominating than a very plain, white, boring, large handkerchief of a man. So I don't know, I'm not sure of that. I don't know why this size has been like this in the histories. Yes. I think like what is important is how do you associate and create forms out of it? What does it mean to use them and create certain lexicon of or certain kind of form out of it in a way. So I think like one has to pick and choose what is required in a way. Yeah,
that's a really great observation. And as an aside, Sumi also comments that in the Western Hemisphere, tissues in boxes come as regular or man size, so you can choose which one you fit into. Right, Kauthik, where are you? Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question live? Chitra, can participants, can the audience unmute themselves?
Yes, they can do. I'm just doing that quickly.
Okay, great.
I think the word ma'am for me repetitively comes from the fact that I teach in different universities. So
Rakhi, don't even make any excuses about it. If somebody wants to call me ma'am, go for it. I take it. Right, so I'll read out Kauthik's question. It's about how did you become an artist, and how do you feel to become a great artist?
I think it's a choice one made at some point in life, and then you regret it sometimes why you made that choice, because 80% of the work is non-creative actually. It's the maybe 15 to 20% of work that you long for, and you'll end up doing the rest of the 80%. And I think that's for all spheres where you are doing something outside of the mundane everyday, and that every day is defined by certain hardware and software of modernity. And art in that sense becomes like a, a point of entry of artistic practice is also to think something outside of your given day to day. So when you're choosing your profession, there is a sense of utopia you work with, and that utopia leads to certain difficult choices in a way. And those choices are, of course, first of all, you let go of your parents' wishes, you fight with them, and then then it doesn't stop there. It's all the time you're like, in some ways, making these difficult steps all the time. Yeah, it doesn't stop. So, yeah.
And I think, that process of being and I don't think there's ever a point where you can say, yes, this is it. It's always evolving, the practice, the definition of artist, how you that definition and that journey. Suman, how does it feel for you to be an artist and a great artist?
Oh, thank you very much. For a long time, if people asked me what I did, I would be kind of almost apologetic about it. And the transition came for me during my master's. I suddenly stopped being someone who made art to becoming an artist, because it became for me such an integral and compulsive way of expressing what I needed to say about the world. So yeah, so it wasn't even a choice, it feels to me.
Yeah,
it was a compulsion. I could have done something else, but this feels important. As Rakhi says, people don't realize how much just pure admin is involved, which is really boring, but you just have to do it. Yeah,
there's admin in everything. Paying bills, I refer to as life admin. So that's just the way.
And it's becoming more and more cumbersome. It's in every sphere. Yes.
Right, I'm just going to read out one more comment, and then I think we're going to have to wrap it up. So Ani Kumari says, I am wondering if the handkerchief can also be thought of as a bargain or negotiation between filth and cleanliness from the point of a white man's burden, I think she's meant to say, to civilize the world, in the sense that the tradition of a handkerchief is a modern Victorian filth and cleanliness.
Ooh, that is an interesting question. But if you think about it, if we're talking about filth and cleanliness, people have always used rags to wipe themselves, but they weren't called handkerchiefs. The handkerchief was an invention at some point, the properly edged, neatly made handkerchief with lace for ladies, as Sumi says. And I don't know whether I see it as the white man's burden to civilize the world. It was the white man's choice to exploit the world, and maybe the handkerchief just wipes, using the handkerchief to wipe off his sense of responsibility to what happened with the world after he imposed his colonialization of it.
I think it would be a really interesting area to look more into, to think about the origins of the handkerchief. Prague has already pointed out, and how that's evolved, and also how that's termed across different cultures and languages. I think that would be really interesting. Rakhi, yes, go ahead.
I think it's also interesting that the near, if you think of it in terms of your memory, if you think of it, there is the rumal, which is it's a generic word actually. It could be a rumal, which is really like a scarf, or it could be something bigger. But at the same time, if you look at the word gamcha, it comes from the eastern part of India, and gamcha is a very eclectic, again, form of fabric which is used by all kinds of people, working class people, middle class people. It's used as a towel, but at the same time, it's used as a hanky. It's used by like, cooks in small eateries and all kinds of people. So I don't know, like, yes, handkerchief, like the word itself comes to us from English, and the object as we've used it, it comes from a colonial heritage, this squarish thing, which is of a particular size, which can fit into a shirt pocket, or which can fit into a specific kind of like attire that we may be using, modern attire. So it's essentially it is a specific heritage that we have inherited along with the language. So yes, for sure, it has a tradition.
Yeah. And it just takes me
Functional
back.
or decorative.
Yeah, but also it takes me back to that point about pocketing secrets, and the handkerchief being used as a place to secrete and as a secret place. So I'm going to leave it there.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank, of course, Uthra Rajgopal, Rakhi Paswani, and Suman Gujarat for being with us today. The presentations were beautiful, the works were inspiring, and of course, thank you, Uthra, for keeping the conversation going when we were struggling with technical glitches. I would really like to apologize for the time lost, and we are just learning as we go, and we hope to do more of these webinars, so please don't lose faith in us. And of course, thank you, audience, for really interesting questions. I found the discourse to be very enlightening. And overall, this was a wonderful experience for all of us, I'm sure. So thank you for joining, and we hope to have you all again in the future soon.